Hi, this was a talk I gave at Angular Brisbane in July 2018. It wasn't recorded at the time, so bear with. There's some coding. It'd be good if you code along or just sit back and enjoy. If you are going to code along, I recommend creating a new application first because it takes a bit of time and you'll have to pause the video. Okay, I am Max. It's at Max on social media. Feel free, contact me, say hello. So I'll be talking about the new CLI as it was then, how to use component libraries and why. So welcome all to Angular Brisbane. Now listen up and let me explain. We'll look at the latest version, you see, not Angular 2 or 4 or 5 or the mythical 3, where workspaces rule and not to detract. I bet you can't do this in React or Vue, to be true. ng new myapps is how we begin, then wait while it downloads and installs everything. cd myapps to change the directory, then code space dot starts your IDE. For those on the inside, and if not, why not, you can type code-insiders space dot. Or use WebStorm or Emacs, or if you want Vim, as long as you have something to edit code in. There's not that much new on the surface at least, but under the covers the power has increased. Angular.json has shortened its name, but much of the rest looks essentially the same. Let's bring a command line with control and backtick. ngg library components will generate quick a library for us with component and service. If you aren't keeping up, there's no need to be nervous. Now, see what the CLI has done with such ease. A folder called projects. This is such a breeze. Within that source, but then lib and not app, because it's a library. Give yourselves a clap. Let's create a component that we will then share. We'll call it thing1 or thing2, I don't care. ngc thing1 -dat project components. This should go quick, taking only a moment. If you created thing1, now you know what to do. Please go ahead and create a thing2. But if it was thing2 you created first, then create a thing1. Oh, I wish I'd rehearsed. Now everyone knows that it is good to share, but we need to tell Angular so it is aware. Edit components.module like this. Exports thing1 component, red fish, blue fish. Okay, I'm sorry for the previous rhyme, but at least it's scanned, which is more can be said for this one I'm doing this time. Thing1 and thing2 must of course be exported, and once you've done that, please just shout out sorted. Did anyone spot the deliberate mistake? There's a prize if you did. No, that one wasn't on purpose. The mistake was that this bit doesn't rhyme. Let us build our library, ng build components, then see the dist folder. Now it has components. Let's create an app that will consume this library in the same workspace. It's revolutionary. ngg application Lorax will do us as a bit of a nod to our old friend Dr. Zeus. This creates an app called Lorax in projects. Angular really isn't at all complex. Type ng serve Lorax and then I allege it'll open in Chrome and possibly Edge. Open your browser then, in case you wondered, go to localhost :4200. Our app is working, but we'll only pause long enough for a round of applause. I'm only joking, I don't want aggravation, there's no need for a standing ovation. In fact, here's what I would recommend. Save all your clapping for right at the end. We'll use our components thing1 and thing2 inside our app Lorax. But what will they do? I'm sorry to say it, but must because it's true. I'm leaving the implementation to you. So open up Lorax's HTML and delete everything. Yes, comments as well. Then replace that text while I wait on stage. This will show our components in our web page. Save changes and Angular compiles our code and refreshes the server because it's in watch mode. Go back to your browser and, what? It's blank? That's okay, I'm playing a prank. If you look at the console, that's F12 on PC, you'll see unknown element, which we could foresee, because how would our Lorax know of thing1 or other components that we have done? We created a package, but so far that's all. We need to install it to use it at all. So npm I dist/components we type, which will install our new prototype. If you look in your package.json file, you'll see that it's added after a while. Under dependencies, a new line. And it's up on the screen as it's too hard to rhyme. So take a look. Is it working right now? Of course it's not. It still doesn't know how. We need for the errors to be suppressed, so edit app.module.ts. Component module must be imported from components. Now we're nearly sorted. But while we're here, let's go all the way and add it to our imports array. Now just ng serve lorax again as before and refresh your browser. Well, this is top drawer. We can see our components up there quite clear. We've done it right. Now I'm off for a beer. Well, not really, but enough rhyming. Let's look at some of the reasons you would want to use components like this. Is it good timing? The advantages of using packages and libraries like this. Consistency across and within projects. So if your components are in a package and all your devs use them, then you don't have 5 different components and 16 different ways of doing whatever it is. You have one and you can work on that and debug it and test it. It's easy to modify. If you need to change the functionality across your application, there's one place to do it, in that component library. True story, back in the day we had a situation where the users of our application were waiting on the phone talking to customers, and while they did, they tended to tap the keyboard. Because they didn't want to change values in the text boxes, they would use the space bar. We ended up with a whole bunch of data with leading spaces in names and registration numbers and things. So the searches didn't work because the searches were searching for begins with, and it began with a space. Fortunately, we'd used a component library of our own, so we went into the text box and we trimmed its exported value. Simple as that, rebuilt the application and every single text box was now trimmed. Otherwise, we would have had hundreds, if not thousands, of places to go through the application to make that change, or would have had to do it at the back end in the database or something. Anyway, protection across large development groups. So what I'm getting at there is you can have a commandment, thou shalt use these components. If everybody knows they are not allowed to use anything other than those components, and if there's a component that doesn't exist they need to use, then they'll need to develop that component. Outsourcing, large groups, new staff, you're all going to be singing from the same hymn sheet. And as I say, really one-step updates. If you need to make a change, you make it once and implement it many times. The disadvantages, though, it's harder to debug. There's no two ways about it. If you have to go and make a change to the component library, build the component library, go back to your application and npm install or yarn upgrade or whatever you need to do, it's slower. If you use workspaces in Angular 6+, not too bad. If you have a mono repo, it's not too bad, but it's still harder than just baking it in, or more time consuming, not necessarily harder. Slower to initially set up projects. If you don't have a component library and you're starting off, you need to go and create components for everything. And that can seem like a daunting task. My recommendation is that you only create the components you need and you only create the functionality of those components that you need now. And then when you come across extra functionality, you go and add it to that component or create a new component. And bugs appear everywhere. By which I mean, if you make a mistake in your text entry component, build your package library and install it and redeploy your applications. Every application now has that bug in it, which can be a bit daunting. Obviously, if you're sensible about it and you make a change to your component library, you roll it out in one application first, and you need to make sure you run the tests in your other applications that proves that you haven't broken anything. because it can be a bit disastrous otherwise. Here's just a really quick example. This was a simple web page. I did this for the presentation. I don't have it here to show. Essentially, it's those 4 components: the button, the 2 text inputs, and the toolbar component. They are all components in my library. They're very simple, just wrappers around the basic functionality. So input is simply a replacement for input type equals text, with a bit of styling in there for fun. But it makes you look how clean that HTML is. There's the components. All the other stuff you're likely to have if you're using the native HTML components just isn't there, because that's been put into the component library. Now, realistically, you will add additional functionality, so you will have more stuff in there in a real application, but it is still much cleaner. And you can see, because all those components begin with max dash, it's easy to spot, hey, that's one of my components. I won't cover the implementation here, but essentially I inherit all of my components from a base component, which implements the control value accessor functionality. So all of these components can be used with reactive and template forms, just like nature intended. And the implementation of your components can be dead simple. It really is just a text box, or it can be really complicated. If you want, like with my rhyming component that I'm not going to demonstrate, it basically allows you to enter some text. That text was fired off at an API which finds rhyming words, and then it read out loud the rhymes. That was just one component that did that. Now, it's unlikely you're really going to want a component that does that multiple times, but in the real world you might want a component that reads out the values that the user's typed in. So if you're developing an app for partially sighted people, for example, maybe that's functionality that you do want. Well, if that functionality just needs to go into your text box, and then you rebuild the application, your entire application now has that functionality. So it is a very powerful thing to do, which is why I recommend it. This was the part of the presentation where I would actually go over to that web page and show it briefly. A, it's not exciting. B, I don't have the code to hand. And C, when we did it, the volume was so loud that it nearly blew my eardrums out. So I'm too scared to ever use it again. That brings us neatly to the end. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. No, you're too kind. What's that? Buy me a beer. I think you'll find that I don't mind the grind. In fact, I'm inclined to unwind with like-minded folk in a bind. So bear in mind that if you find I'm disinclined to be left behind, that rhymed.